The Shreth Armada came out of faster-than-light travel in a long, clean line, 40 warships, each one larger than anything most species in the known galaxy had ever dared to build. Fleet Commander Voss stood at the front of his bridge and watched his display screens fill up with stars, sensor data, and the neat formation of his own fleet stretching out behind him. It was a good sight. It was always a good sight. Then his navigator tail made a small sound. Not a word, just a sound, the kind that meant something was wrong. Voss turned, report. Tail's bioluminescent skin, which normally held a calm blue when he was focused, had shifted toward pale yellow. Caution. Uncertainty. Commander, there is a vessel ahead, sitting in the transit corridor. It is not moving. Voss walked to the main sensor display and looked at it himself. One contact. One ship. It was not large by Shreth standards, roughly half the length of his own flagship. No fleet behind it. No support ships flanking it. It was just there, sitting in the middle of the corridor like a stone in a river, and it had not moved since they dropped out of FTL. Species? Voss asked. Human, Tail said. He pulled up what little the Shreth database had on them. A few trade reports. A border survey from 3 cycles ago. A note that humans originated from a dense, high-gravity world near a yellow star. There was not much else. Voss looked at the single ship on the screen. Then he looked at his 40. He felt the gold pulse of amusement move across his chest and up his neck. Hail them. The channel opened. On the secondary screen, a human face appeared. She was not young, not old, short hair. A fresh cut above her left eye that had been taped closed but not properly treated yet. She looked like someone who had been working hard before this call interrupted her. Behind her, the bridge of her ship was visible, and Voss could see that her crew was already at their stations, already working, already ready. Her name, as she gave it, was Captain Dara Holt. Her ship was the UES Ironwall. Voss introduced himself with the full weight of his title and the name of the Armada. He told her, in the calm tone he used when speaking to people who had no real options, that she was sitting in a transit corridor claimed under Shreth expansion rights, and that she should move her ship immediately or face destruction. Dara Holt listened to all of this without any change in her expression. Then she said, "This corridor falls under the disputed passage agreement signed at Loran Station 4 years ago. Your Armada does not have clearance to transit this route. I am formally requesting that you hold your position until the matter can be reviewed by a neutral council." Voss stared at her. "You are one ship." "Yes," she said. "I have 40. "I can count," she said. The gold amusement in Voss's skin deepened. Behind him, some of his officers made low sounds that were the Shreth equivalent of laughter. Even Rill, his sub-commander, let a faint shimmer of yellow gold cross his arms. It was genuinely funny. A single patrol vessel, damaged from the look of it, sitting in the path of the greatest fleet the Shreth had assembled in a generation, quoting a treaty at them. Voss leaned forward slightly. "Captain Holt, I am going to give you one more opportunity to move your ship. Take it." Dara was quiet for a moment, not thinking, not scared. She had the look of someone finishing a task before responding to an interruption. Then she looked directly at him and said, "We will not be moving, Commander. This corridor is protected space. If you open fire on this vessel, you will be making a decision that your government cannot walk back. I would encourage you to think about that." Voss closed the channel. He stood there for a moment in the silence of his bridge. 40 ships. One human vessel that was already showing heat damage on its rear port hull from whatever it had been doing before they arrived. It was not a threat. It was barely an inconvenience. But it was not moving. Sub-Commander Rill came to stand beside him. "Your orders, Commander." Voss looked at the image of the iron wall on his screen, still holding position, not running, not powering down its weapons, not doing anything a rational captain of a single ship should be doing when an armada of 40 warships was pointing itself at them. "Target the human vessel," Voss said. All forward batteries fire. The Armada opened up. The first volley crossed the distance in less than 4 seconds. It hit the iron wall like a wall of white light. And the iron wall fired back. The sensors screamed. That was the first thing Tail noticed. Not the visual, not the fire blooming across the human ship's hull, not the satisfying ripple of energy lance impacts along its side, but the sound of his own sensors screaming warnings at him, because even as the iron wall was being hit, it was already moving. Not running, not retreating, rotating. Slowly, steadily, turning its undamaged flank toward the Armada while its weapons came online. Then it fired. The first railgun round came in at a speed Tail's targeting system almost failed to track. It was not energy. It was not plasma. It was a solid metal projectile moving at a fraction below the speed that would have turned it into a relativistic weapon. It punched through the forward hull of the Shreth destroyer Velcon like the ship's armor did not exist, passed through 2 interior compartments, and exited through the engine housing. The Velcon lost propulsion immediately and began a slow, powerless drift out of formation. The Armada had been firing for 11 seconds. On the iron wall's lower decks, Engineer Dex Garrow was already running, not away from the damage, toward it. The first volley had blown a section of the secondary hull plating clean off the port side and started a coolant fire in Corridor 7. Dex had 3 crew members with him and a repair kit that was not designed for this scale of problem. He looked at the fire, looked at the blown plating, and started working anyway. "Seal the corridor and vent the section," he said to the youngest of his team, a crew member named Willa who was pressing herself against the wall with wide eyes. "Don't look at the hole, look at the valve. Turn it." She turned it. Back on the bridge, Chief Gunnery Officer Bo Reeves was watching his targeting screens with the focused quiet of a man doing mathematics. He did not shout. He did not react to the impacts shaking the ship around him. He selected targets based on one rule he had explained to his team before the battle began. Engines first, weapons second, hull third. Disable, then overwhelm. His second railgun salvo hit the forward weapon array of the Shreth cruiser running closest to the iron wall's port side. The array detonated. The cruiser pulled back from the engagement line to assess damage. That opened a small gap in the encirclement. "There," Bo said to his targeting team, "don't let that close." Fleet Commander Voss was not amused anymore. The gold had left his skin entirely. He stood at his sensor display watching a ship that should have broken apart in the first volley still firing, still maneuvering, still making his formation bleed. 2 vessels damaged significantly, one drifting with no engine power, all in the first 3 minutes. "Concentrate fire on its forward hull," he said. "Bring up the second line, overlap the fields." His second line of ships moved forward and added their fire to the barrage. The iron wall disappeared inside a cloud of energy impacts. For a moment, Voss thought it was over. The cloud was too thick, too hot, too sustained for anything to survive. Then the cloud shifted, and the iron wall came out the other side, hull glowing in 3 places, one of its outer weapon pods gone but still moving, still firing. A missile cluster launched from its underbelly and spread across the engagement zone in a wide fan pattern. 2 Shreth ships rolled hard to avoid them. One did not roll fast enough. The detonation took out its sensor array and half its bridge windows. Tail watched all of this from his station and pulled up the old database file on humans again. He read the line about the home world: dense atmosphere, high gravity, extreme weather patterns, a species that had spent its entire evolutionary history being tested by a planet that seemed specifically designed to kill things. He thought about the captain, the way she had not moved, the way she had looked at Voss's 40 ships and said, "I can count." He did not say what he was thinking, but he changed the color of his own station lighting to a very faint red, warning to himself. Private warning. He had been in 42 battles. He had never felt the need to warn himself before. On the Iron Wall's bridge, A second volley from the Armada struck the upper hull and sent a shockwave through the ship that knocked 2 crew members off their feet. A ceiling panel came down and hit Captain Dara Holt across the left shoulder hard enough to spin her sideways. She grabbed the edge of her command console, steadied herself, and did not sit down. Her shoulder was not working properly. She kept her face still. "Damage report," she said. "Railgun Battery 2 is offline," came the answer. "Missile Bay 1 is venting. Hull breach on Deck 4, emergency sealed. 30% shield capacity remaining." Dara looked at her tactical screen. The Armada was adjusting. Rill, Voss's sub-commander, had noticed the rotation strategy and was beginning to position ships to cut off the angles. They were learning. That was the problem with fighting a fleet instead of a single enemy. 40 minds were watching her and adapting. She looked at the timer in the corner of her screen. 81 minutes until Admiral Briggs and the fleet arrived. 81 minutes was a very long time. "Bo," she said, "keep targeting engines. Dex, I need that port plating back or something in its place within 20 minutes. Dex's voice came back over the comm, dry and exhausted. "Define something." "Anything," she said. There was a short pause, then working on it. Vice called a pause. Not a retreat, not a withdrawal, a tactical pause. He gave it a proper name in his log so that no one listening later could call it what it looked like. He pulled the Armada back 3,000 kilometers and held position, and he told his officers it was to recalibrate targeting systems and redistribute energy loads. Both of those things were technically true. Neither was the real reason. The real reason was that 6 of his 40 ships were damaged. One was drifting without engine power, and the human vessel was still functional. He stood in the center of his bridge and looked at the iron wall on the long-range view. The ship was burning in 2 places. Its hull had visible scorch and impact lines across 60% of its surface. One of its outer weapon mounts was completely gone. By any reasonable calculation, it should have stopped fighting 20 minutes ago. It had not stopped fighting. It had not even slowed down. Voss turned to Rill. "What do we know about them?" Rill pulled up the database file. He read from it in a flat, careful voice. "The species is called human. Homeworld designation Sol 3. High-gravity planet, dense atmosphere, extreme temperature ranges across the surface. They have been a space-capable civilization for approximately 200 years. They have never initiated direct conflict with the Shreth Conclave. Prior to this engagement, no Shreth commander had exchanged weapons fire with a human vessel." Voss waited. "Is that all?" "There is one additional note," Rill said. He paused in a way that was not like him. "An observation from the border survey team 3 cycles ago. The surveyor noted that humans have a documented history of internal warfare spanning their entire recorded civilization. They have been fighting each other, continuously, for thousands of years. The surveyor flagged this as evidence of an unstable species unlikely to pose organized resistance." Voss looked at the burning ship on his screen that had just crippled 7 of his vessels. "The surveyor was wrong," he said. Tails spoke up from his station. "Commander, I have been running probability models on the engagement." He stopped. "Say it," Voss said. "At our current rate of loss, and assuming the human ship continues to perform at the level it has demonstrated, a full destruction of the target will cost us an additional 4 to 6 vessels before it is achieved, possibly more." He paused again. "I want to note that this projection assumes the human ship does not receive reinforcement. I have no data on whether reinforcement is possible." The bridge was quiet. On the iron wall, Dara was on a tight beam channel to Admiral Briggs. Tight beam meant the signal was narrow and hard to intercept. She spoke in short, direct sentences. "Fleet status." 74 minutes out, Briggs said. "We are pushing the drives." "Push harder." "Dara." "I have lost Battery 2 and Missile Bay 1. My port plating is being held together with coolant pipes and cargo clamps right now. I need you here sooner than 74 minutes. There was a brief silence. Then Briggs said, 68, that is the absolute limit. Understood. Dara closed the channel. She turned back to her bridge. Her crew looked tired, not defeated. There was a difference, and she had learned to read it over the years. Defeat was when people stopped checking their screens and started watching the door. Tired was when people kept working with shaking hands. Her crew was tired. How long has it been? She asked, to no one in particular. 29 minutes since first contact, said her helmsman, a quiet man named Caro who had barely spoken since the battle started. 29 minutes, it felt longer. Below decks, Dex had solved the port plating problem in a way that would have horrified the engineers who designed the ship. He had taken 6 cargo containers from the loading bay, welded them flat against the exposed hull section with the ship's emergency cutting torch, and then flooded the space between the containers and the inner hull with emergency sealant foam and rerouted coolant pipes to keep the temperature down. It was not armor. It would not stop a direct hit. But it would hold atmosphere, and it would absorb enough of a glancing blow to keep the section from becoming a second breach point. He stood back and looked at it. It was ugly. It would probably embarrass someone in the engineering review board later. He didn't care, it worked. Back on the Shreth flagship, Rill was standing close to Voss and speaking quietly enough that the rest of the bridge crew could not hear clearly. "Commander, I want to raise a possibility." "No," Voss said. "You have not heard what I was going to say. You were going to suggest withdrawal." Rill's skin shifted color, pale amber, the Shreth equivalent of uncomfortable truth. "I was going to suggest we consider the cost of this engagement against its value. The transit corridor is not strategically critical. There are 2 other routes that reach the same destination. The loss of 6 vessels to take 1 corridor." 7 vessels, Voss said, if you include the Velcon. 7, Rill agreed, against 1 human ship. Voss stared at the iron wall, still holding position, still burning, still there. "If we pull back from 1 human ship," he said quietly, "every species in this sector will hear about it within the month. Every species we have conquered, every species we are currently negotiating with, every species watching our borders. They will all hear that the Shreth Armada turned back from 1 ship." Rill said nothing. Voss turned back to his crew. "In the pause, move back to engagement range. This time we encircle completely. No rotation angles, no gaps." Tail recorded the order in the battle log and changed his station, lighting to a deeper red. Tail did something he had never done in 42 battles. He opened a personal record file and began writing notes. Not tactical notes, not targeting data or probability models. Observations. The kind a researcher would write. He told himself it was because the engagement was statistically unusual and worth documenting. He did not look too closely at the other reason, which was that some part of him had already decided this battle would be studied long after it was over, and he wanted his account to be part of the record. He wrote, "The human vessel has now sustained damage across 70% of its hull surface. It has lost 2 primary weapon systems. Its maneuvering capacity is reduced, and yet its crew has not requested quarter, has not attempted to flee, and has not shown any sign of the behavior patterns we associate with a force approaching defeat. I have reviewed our data on 16 other species. None of them fought this way at this level of damage. I do not have an explanation." He saved the file and went back to his screens. The encirclement was forming. Voss had arranged the remaining functional ships into a full sphere pattern around the iron wall's position, closing the angles Dara had been using to keep the ship rotating through only partial fire coverage. When the sphere was complete, the iron wall would face fire from every direction simultaneously. No rotation would help, no single undamaged flank to present. Dara saw it forming on her tactical display. She had been expecting it. She called Dex. "The debris from the 2 ships we disabled in the first pass," she said. "Where is it?" Dex checked his sensors. Drifting, about 900 kilometers off our starboard side. Why? Because we're going to need it, she said. Start calculating drift vectors. I want to know exactly where every large piece ends up in the next 40 minutes. Dex was quiet for a moment. Are you thinking what I think you're thinking? Only if it will work. Another pause. It'll work, he said, but we'll need to use almost everything we have left in the missile bays to do it. How much is almost everything? Everything, Dex said. Literally everything. After that we have railguns and whatever Bo can do with them. Dara looked at the timer. 61 minutes until Briggs arrived. She looked at the encirclement taking shape around her ship. She looked at the debris field drifting off to the side. Start rigging them, she said. On the other side of the engagement zone, Sub-Commander Rill watched the sphere formation close with professional satisfaction. It was a clean piece of fleet maneuvering. Precise. Whatever happened in the next exchange, Voss would have this on record, a correctly executed tactical encirclement against a difficult target. That was worth something. Then Rill noticed the human ship change its heading slightly. Just a few degrees. Enough to be deliberate, not enough to be an escape attempt. What is it doing? He asked Tail quietly. Tail checked. Orienting toward the debris field from our earlier losses, he said. Rill watched the iron wall hold its new heading, steady, pointed directly at the drifting wreckage of 2 Shreth destroyers. Why? He asked. Tail did not answer because he did not know. And not knowing, in a battle where the humans had been ahead of them at every turn, made his skin pulse the color of ice. Inside the iron wall, the mood had changed in a quiet way. Not better, not worse, just settled. The crew had passed the point where fear was useful and arrived somewhere on the other side of it. Bo Reeves sat at his gunnery station with a cold cup of something he had stopped tasting 2 hours ago and watched his targeting screens. 2 railgun batteries left. Enough ammunition for sustained fire for another 40 minutes. After that, they would be throwing insults. One of his younger gunners, a woman named Petra, was recalibrating her targeting scope for the 3rd time. Not because it needed recalibrating. Bo recognized the motion, something to do with her hands while she thought about things she could not say out loud. He rolled his chair over to her station. Petra. She looked up. You're doing fine, he said. I'm scared, she said very quietly. Good, he said. Scared means you're paying attention. He nodded at her screen. Those ships out there are scared too. They just don't know it yet. Keep your targeting clean, that's all. She nodded and stopped recalibrating her scope. Bo went back to his station. He pulled up the encirclement map and studied the spacing between ships. Voss had closed the sphere almost completely. One small gap remained on the lower starboard quarter, not large enough for the iron wall to move through, but large enough that Bo could see the debris field through it on his sensors. He noted the gap, filed it away, said nothing. The sphere finished closing. Voss gave the order. The second major assault of the battle began. Energy lances hit the iron wall from 17 different vectors at once. The ship shook so hard that 3 crew members on the bridge were thrown out of their seats. Dara held the console with both hands and felt the whole ship shudder around her like a living thing in pain. Alarms fired on top of alarms. The lights cut to emergency red. And in the middle of all of it, Dex's voice came over the comm. Calm, focused, almost cheerful in the way that people get when they have committed fully to a plan and there is no point being nervous anymore. Trap is set, he said, whenever you're ready. Dara waited. This was the hardest part, not the fighting. The waiting inside the fighting, while the ship screamed around her and her crew held on and the assault from 17 directions kept coming. She needed the Armada to commit fully. She needed every ship moving inward, tightening the sphere, convinced that the end was seconds away. If she triggered it too early, the outer ships would have time to reverse thrust and clear the debris zone. She needed them close. The iron wall took 3 more direct hits. Deck 2 lost pressure and sealed off automatically. The last functional sensor tower on the upper hull went dark. Caro, her helmsman, had blood on his face from a cut she had not seen him get. He was still flying the ship. Tail's voice came through on the Shreth tactical frequency. She had cracked their short-range channel 40 minutes ago and had been listening since. She heard him say, clearly, "Target's weapon output is dropping. I believe we are near the end." She heard Voss say, "Advance, finish it." She hit the trigger. The debris field exploded. Dex had spent 40 minutes threading the Iron Wall's remaining missiles into the drifting wreckage of the 2 Shreth destroyers destroyed in the first pass. Not attached to the outside, inside, tucked into broken hull sections and dead engine housings, set to proximity triggers calibrated to Shreth hull signatures. The debris had looked like debris. Sensors scanning it saw cold metal and dead systems. Nobody scanned for active ordnance inside wreckage that both sides had produced together. When the sphere tightened and the advancing ships crossed the proximity threshold, every missile fired at once. The debris field became a wall of fire and shrapnel moving outward in all directions at high speed. 4 Shreth ships were inside the blast radius. 2 took catastrophic hull damage and went dark immediately. 1 lost its engine section entirely and began spinning. The 4th ship's crew managed an emergency FTL jump with unknown damage. It simply vanished from sensors mid-explosion. The sphere formation broke. Ships that had been advancing now reversed hard. 2 of them collided in the confusion, a light scrape, not fatal, but enough to send both spinning out of their assigned positions. The clean, tight formation Voss had spent 20 minutes assembling came apart in under 10 seconds. Bo Reeves had been waiting for exactly this. He fired both remaining railgun batteries at the flagship's engine section in a single coordinated salvo. He had calculated the angle during the pause between assaults, when the flagship had held a steady position for exactly long enough. The rounds crossed the engagement zone and hit the flagship's lower drive cluster with the full kinetic force of a weapon designed to crack military-grade hull plating. The flagship did not explode. Voss was still alive, but every engine on the ship went dark simultaneously, and the vessel began a slow, powerless drift with no capacity to maneuver. Voss grabbed his console as the ship lurched. The lights on his bridge went to emergency backup. Screens flickered. Rill was shouting something at the damage control team. Somewhere below, systems were failing in a cascade that the crew could not stop fast enough. Through the damaged viewport, Voss could see the Iron Wall. Still there, still burning. Missing weapons scored black across its entire hull, one side visibly held together with something that looked nothing like standard repair work. But it was turning slowly to orient toward him. He tried to give an order. His communications array was down. Tail was not waiting for an order. He had watched the debris field detonate. He had watched 4 ships taken out in the blast and the formation collapse. He had watched the flagship lose power, and he had made a decision that, technically, required commander authorization but which he believed any review board would validate given the circumstances. He broadcast on the fleet emergency frequency, the one every ship could hear regardless of what else was happening, and he said, "All vessels, this is Senior Navigator Tail aboard the Kethvar flagship. The commander's communications are down. I am declaring a tactical withdrawal under Emergency Authority Provision 7. All functional vessels are to jump to the fallback coordinates immediately. Leave no one behind who can be retrieved. Execute now." There was a moment of silence on the channel. Then ships started jumping. One by one, and then in small groups, the remaining functional Shreth vessels fired their FTL drives and disappeared from the engagement zone. In 90 seconds, the space around the Iron Wall went from a battlefield full of warships to a quiet field of drifting wreckage and one powerless Shreth flagship sitting dark and still. On the Iron Wall, the alarms kept running for another 30 seconds before Caro realized there was nothing left to alarm about and silenced them one by one. The bridge was very quiet. Petra, at her gunnery station, looked at her screens, then at Bo, then at her screens again. "Did we?" she started. "Yes," Bo said. Dara was already on the channel to Briggs. "Admiral, the Armada has withdrawn. One Shreth vessel remaining, their flagship, no power, no movement. Crew status unknown. I need medical, engineering, and about 6 hours of sleep in that order." Briggs's voice came back. There was something in it Dara rarely heard from the Admiral, something close to disbelief. "Confirmed. We are 40 minutes out. Dara, how many ships engaged you?" Dara looked out at the wreckage and the dark flagship. 40, she said. A long silence. "We'll talk when I get there," Briggs said. Dara set the comm down. She looked at Caro. He was wiping the blood off his face with the back of his hand, looking out the viewport at the ruined field around them. He caught her looking and gave her a small, exhausted nod. She nodded back. Then she turned to the rest of her crew and said simply, "Good work." Voss sat in the dark. The emergency lighting on the flagship's bridge was weak, orange-red, and it made everything look like the inside of something dying. His crew moved around him quietly, trying to restore systems that were not coming back, sending distress signals on frequencies that might not reach anyone for hours. Rill was at the far end of the bridge, speaking in low tones to the damaged team. Nobody was looking at Voss directly, which was its own kind of answer to how this felt. He looked out the viewport. The wreckage of his armada was out there, pieces of ships he had commanded, crewed by people who had followed his orders into a battle he had told them would be over in minutes. Some of those ships had jumped out intact. Some had not. 3 were confirmed destroyed. Others drifted damaged in the surrounding area, waiting for rescue that would bring a great many questions with it. And in the middle of all of it, the iron wall was still there, moving slowly, trailing debris from its own hull, clearly in serious trouble, but moving. A human rescue shuttle was detaching from it and heading toward the flagship. They were coming here. Voss understood that they were coming to assess the threat, to check whether the flagship still had weapons. That was what he would have done. He told his crew to stand down and make no aggressive moves. He said it calmly. It was the only thing he could control right now. The shuttle docked. Boots sounded in the corridor outside. The bridge door opened and 4 humans in pressure suits came through, 2 of them carrying medical equipment. Behind them, not in a pressure suit, in a uniform that had clearly been through a war today, was Captain Dara Holt. She looked worse up close. Her left arm was held at a careful angle that meant the shoulder underneath was seriously damaged. There was dried blood above her eye and a long burn mark on the side of her neck. She looked like someone who should be in a medical bay. She was walking the flagship's bridge instead, looking at the systems, the crew, the viewport, with calm and practical eyes. She stopped in front of Voss. He was taller than her. Most Shreth were taller than most humans. She looked up at him without any change in her expression and said, "Are you injured?" "No," he said. "Your crew." 3 are injured, 2 are serious." She turned immediately to the humans carrying medical equipment and nodded toward the injured crew members at the back of the bridge. They moved without hesitation, without being told twice. They went to Shreth crew members who had, an hour ago, been trying to kill them and began working. Voss watched this and could not make it fit into any framework he had. "Why?" he said. It came out without ceremony, but she understood what he was asking. "Because you are not a threat right now," she said, "and people are hurt. Those 2 things are the whole calculation." Voss was quiet for a long time. His skin cycled through several colors without settling. Confusion, something close to respect, a gray shade the Shreth used for moments when existing categories stopped working. "You would not have received the same from us," he said. "I know," she said. "That is not why we do it." He looked at her. "What are your people?" It was the same question he had asked over the channel at the start of all this, when he thought it was a joke. He was not asking it the same way now. Dara considered for a moment. Complicated, she said. Old, we have been fighting since before we had ships. We have been through things that should have ended us and did not. I think that makes us hard to understand from the outside. She paused. We did not want this fight, Commander. We want the corridor respected and we want you to go home. That is all we have ever wanted. 40 minutes later, Admiral Briggs arrived with the fleet. 12 human warships held position at a respectful distance from the Iron Wall and the drifting flagship. Briggs came aboard and looked at the damage without speaking for several seconds. At the patched hull panels and jury-rigged repairs, and the burn marks on every surface. At Caro still at his helm and Bo still at his gunnery screens. Report, she finally said. One Shreth flagship disabled, crew receiving medical attention. 3 Shreth vessels confirmed destroyed, estimated 10 others damaged. Armada has withdrawn from the corridor. Dara paused. I will need a new ship. Briggs looked around the ruined bridge. I'll see what I can do, she said quietly. Meanwhile, far across the sector, Tail was writing. He had been writing since the jump, filling his personal record with everything he had observed and failed to understand. He wrote about the ship that would not die, about the captain who came aboard a defeated enemy vessel to treat the wounded, about the mathematics that had not worked and the formations that had broken against a hull held together with cargo containers. At the end, he wrote, I do not believe the Shreth Conclave understands what it has found on the far edge of this sector. I am submitting this record as a formal intelligence advisory. I believe it should be read by every member of the High Council before any further action in this direction is authorized. He sent the file. 17 days later, in the Shreth Council chamber, a senior member looked up from Tail's report and asked the question the whole room had been thinking. How many human ships were involved in this engagement? Rill, standing before the council, answered without hesitation. 1, he said. The chamber was silent for a long time. Then from the far end of the table, a quiet voice said, And how many ships do they have? Nobody answered, because nobody knew. And in that silence, with 17 council members looking at each other, the Shreth Conclave began, for the very first time, to be afraid.